Welcome back to Grid Chat. I'm your host, Marissa Tandon, and today we're going to be talking about the Formula 101 on F1 Academy. What is the series? Why is it so important? And how does it work? First and foremost, what is F1 Academy? F1 Academy is the single-seater, all-female spec series for Formula racing. This year, it'll be running as a support series for 7 of the F1 race weekends, starting this weekend at Jeddah. So it's a perfect time to break everything down and figure out how this series works. This series is in its second season, and the goal is to provide support for young women to eventually make it all the way up to the top of Formula One. As it stands right now, all 20 seats in F1 are taken by a male driver, but this is not a rule. It's not an all-male series. In fact, in the history of F1, 5 women have entered Grand Prix, and Lella Lombardi actually scored points. She remains the only woman to do so, but F1 Academy is an attempt to make a step towards other women following in her footsteps. Now, F1 Academy is run by Susie Wolf, who you have probably heard of before, as she's a pretty prominent name in this world. Susie now serves as the managing director for F1 Academy, but before that, she started her own career in racing and karting, followed by a career in Formula Renault and Formula 3. Susie also served as a development driver for Williams Racing from 2012 to 2015, and in 2014, she became the first woman to participate in an F1 race weekend since 1992. After Susie retired from racing in 2015, after saying she had gone as far as she thought she could, Susie remained a part of the sport, moving up into a team principal role and later a CEO role in Formula E. Last year, she turned her attention to F1 Academy and developing other young women in this series. Now, F1 Academy also filled the void that was left by the cancellation of the W Series. 2023 was the inaugural season for F1 Academy, and we've already seen some pretty big changes of what they're looking to make this series a little bit more sustainable moving forward. So what's the format of the season? What are those changes? What are the rules? There will be 7 races this season, each corresponding with the F1 race at the same track. They'll kick things off this weekend at Jeddah, followed by round 2 in Miami in May. After that, they'll be in Barcelona in June, Zandvoort in August, Singapore in September, Lusail in November, and Abu Dhabi in December. The race weekends will follow a similar format to F1, but the periods are shorter. So some of this might sound familiar, but I'll break down the timing for you. Free practice sessions will run for 40 minutes each, and there will be up to 2 each race weekend. There's one qualifying session that runs for 30 minutes, and then there are 2 races each weekend. Now, since qualifying only happens once, but there are 2 races, it's a little bit different than how it works in F1. The grid for the first race is set by everyone's fastest lap during qualifying, and the grid for the second race is set by everyone's second fastest lap. So 1 qualifying session, 2 races, pretty simple. Now, points are also going to sound pretty familiar because they work almost the same as F1 with a few exceptions. Points for the first 10 are the same as in F1. So when you finish first, you're going to get 25 points. Second is going to receive 18 points, then 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 2, and 1 for the remaining top 10. Drivers who don't finish in the top 10 will not finish in the points, so the bottom 5 racers of each race will not receive any points. Just like F1, there is an additional point up for grabs for fastest lap as long as that driver finishes in the top 10. And there are also 2 additional points up for grabs each race for those who take the pole position. So if you take pole position in race 1, you get 2 points, or if you take pole position in race 2, you get 2 points, or if you take pole position in both races, you would receive an additional 4 points in addition to whatever you finish for the race. So that's a rundown of the format, the timing, the points, the nitty-gritty. But to me, the most important and most exciting part of the racing is getting attached to the drivers behind the wheel. I think the best way to get into a sport is just to attach yourself to one athlete that you really want to root for the whole season and to follow their career. So in order to help you do that, we're going to go through all of the drivers, who's supporting them, and how this works. F1 Academy has a total of 15 permanent drivers on the grid. Everyone has to be between the ages of 25 and 16 when entering their first race, and this year they also implemented a cap on how many seasons you can have in F1 Academy. Each driver can race a maximum of 2 seasons in the series, which means a couple of the drivers I'm going to tell you about today are not going to be able to race again next season. They were a part of the inaugural season, and so this will be their last year according to the new cap. Now, the reason that we're seeing these kinds of limitations added into F1 Academy is that this series is not intended to be the place where you go for your entire career. The point of F1 Academy is not to create an all-female league to be competitive with F1 or the other levels that come before it, but rather to create a series where women are able to be supported in order for them to move up into the other higher ranks. This series is intended to level the playing field and give the support that is necessary for women to make it out of that initial phase into the more competitive ranks. As I go through these drivers, you're going to notice that some of them are having their first experience in single-seaters in F1 Academy. That's actually a great part of what F1 Academy does, which is that it gives a space for that to happen. The idea is that if every season we're putting 15 young women in a seat where they are being supported and getting track time, ultimately we will see more of those young women move up through the ranks. As it stands right now, there's actually only 1 woman in F3, which is Sophia Flores, who races with Alpine. So think about it as just like kind of a numbers game, right? The more women that we put out into a space where they have a chance to move forward, the more likelihood that there is going to be more than one that moves forward. So who are these 15 drivers and who are they racing for? Well, for the first time this year, 10 of those 15 drivers are going to be be supported by each of the F1 teams. That means those 10 cars are going to be running the livery of their F1 team. The other 5 are supported by independent sponsors, which is actually pretty exciting. We'll cover the 10 drivers being supported by F1 teams first, but then we'll talk a little bit about how those strategic partnerships are so exciting. Starting at the top of the F1 grid, Red Bull Racing is supporting Hamda Al-Kabasi. Now, Hamda is 21. This will be her second season in F1 Academy. She raced last year in 2023. Last season, she scored 207 points and finished third overall, so a pretty strong finish for her. Before her time in F1 Academy, she karted for 4 years, and then she moved into a stint with Italian F4, followed by F4 UAE. And in F4 UAE, she had 3 wins and finished 4th overall. Notably, she was also a part of the 2022 all-women FIA F3 test. Now, I really like Hamda, and I think that's partially because she's expressed a lot of her personality online outside of just racing. She has this added benefit of the fact that she gets to race with her sister and that they get to kind of spend time together and promote themselves as racers together. I think it's a cute story. I think they show how much personality they have. They're quite funny. And also, she's a very talented driver. So I think the two things combined are going to show a little bit of her star power as she moves through this series. Moving on to Mercedes, they are entering a rookie driver this season, but to be honest, Doriane Pin is anything but an inexperienced driver. At only 20 years old, she's already been dubbed the Pocket Rocket, and she raced full-time for the Iron Dames in 2021, where she scored 5 podiums. In 2022, she moved on to the Ferrari Challenge Europe Series, where she won 9 of 14 races. Now, in the preseason leading up to this F1 Academy season, we've already seen Doriane Pin take an F4 win. And I'll be honest, despite this being Doriane's first season in F1 Academy, I think she's one of the more experienced drivers on the grid, and you're definitely going to see her competing for podiums throughout. Now, Ferrari is entering a driver they already have a pretty strong relationship with, Maya Weg. She's 19 and she's a member of the Ferrari Driver Academy, and she's actually the first female driver to ever become a member of the Ferrari Driver Academy. Maya has already competed in FRECA, so some people may see this move as a little bit of a step back. For context, last year's F1 Academy winner Marta Garcia received a fully funded FRECA seat as a result of her win. However, I think this choice from Ferrari is a little bit of a legacy one. It is a good story and a little bit exciting to see the first female driver who was a part of the Ferrari Driver Academy compete in F1 Academy next to all of these F1 races. Now, McLaren's driver is the driver you have most likely already heard of. That's because McLaren was the first to announce who would be racing for them in F1 Academy, which was Bianca Bustamante. When they announced that Bianca would be their driver for F1 Academy this year, they also announced that she would be a part of their driver development program, becoming the first woman to be a part of that program. Bianca is 19 and she started karting in the Philippines when she was 3 years old. She also raced in F1 Academy last year, where she took a total of 2 wins, 2 podiums, and 116 points, finishing 7th overall. Now, Bianca also made a big splash last year when she had a partnership with Anastasia of Beverly Hills. In a separate series, Anastasia of Beverly Hills, the makeup brand, actually sponsored her car, which was really cool to see. It was a moment for us to kind of see the other types of sponsorships women in racing can open up, the excitement that brings, the brand awareness, and the value to those brands. And we'll get back to that later because it was a little bit of a predecessor for one of our sponsors this year. Next, we have Aston Martin, which is a team that has been visibly supporting women for a while now. They're supporting Swiss racer Tina Hausmann, and she's raced a bit in F4. In 2022, she had a test drive. In 2023, she took a step up into F4 herself. She raced in the Formula Winter Series, where she took a podium during her debut weekend, and she also raced in Italian F4 in the Euro Championships that year. Now, Aston Martin's choices this season are pretty exciting to me because in addition to supporting Tina Hausmann, they've also taken this chance to promote another woman who they work with, Jess Hawkins. Now, you may have heard of Jess Hawkins already because last year she became the first woman to drive a modern Formula One car. She put in 26 laps at Budapest in the AMR 21. Her lap times were also pretty good, and some of the comments that were made by the team seemed like her times were actually better than the Formula One test driver that they use. Now, Jess is actually taking on the role of head of racing for F1 Academy for Aston Martin. I believe they're the only team that are putting out this position and making a big deal out of it. She's already a part of this organization, has been a woman in this organization as a driver for a bit now, and she'll be spending time with Tina Hausmann developing her directly as a driver for F1 Academy. We've already seen Aston Martin support Jess and utilize her in interesting ways throughout her time as a driver with them, but giving her this clear, defined role also gives the series itself a little bit more legitimacy, as Aston Martin is saying this is important enough for us to have a head of racing for F1 Academy. And we're choosing a name that already means a lot to women in the series. Next, we have Alpine, and they are entering the British driver Abby Pulling. Now, Abby raced in F1 Academy last year. She scored 175 points and finished 5th overall. She started racing in 2018, made her F4 debut in 2020, and in 2021 and 2022, she also raced in the W Series. Now, as I mentioned, Abby raced in F1 Academy last year. She's raced in the W Series. She's pretty familiar with this type of car. Abby also became a member of the Alpine Driver Academy in 2023, and she's kind of following in the footsteps of F3 driver Sophia Florsch, who also races with Alpine. Now, Williams made kind of a splash with the driver that they announced for F1 Academy. They went with Leah Block, who's an American driver who's very well known outside of this series in America. Leah started competing in karting at age 11, and at only age 15, she entered rally driving. At 17, she became the youngest ARA champion in history. She's also raced in Extreme E and Nitro Cross, so she has a lot of experience, just not in single-seaters. F1 Academy is going to be a big challenge for her because she's moving into a completely different vehicle. But Williams has a big history of supporting women in this sport. As I mentioned earlier, Susie Wolf was a test driver for Williams, and they also have another well-known female development driver, Jamie Chadwick. Now, Jamie is currently racing with Indy Next and often does a lot of events with Williams. I actually got to see her speak at a fan zone event at the Vegas GP last year, and it was really exciting to listen to her talk about sort of the legacy that Williams has with women in racing and how supportive they've been before they were being told they needed to be. And it makes sense because they also used to have a woman at the helm with Claire Williams as their deputy team principal. Now with Leah, I think it's going to take her some time to get comfortable in a single seater in this series. I don't know how competitive she's going to be this season, but I do think that with Williams, they're going to put in the amount of effort that's required to help her get comfortable and move forward. This choice doesn't necessarily mean they're going to see a lot of wins this season, but what it does mean is that they are actually trying to do what F1 Academy is meant to do. They found a promising young talent and they're putting in the time, effort, and money required to help her develop into someone who could be competitive through all of the ranks. To me, this choice shows that Williams not only wants to be a part of women in racing, they actually want to choose people that they could develop and have them be valuable to themselves as a team. Now for VCARB, we have Honda's older sister, Amna Alkabasi. She also raced in F1 Academy last year, scoring 117 points and finishing 6th overall. She's competed in Italian F4, F4 UAE, F3 Asian, and FRECA. This is also Amna's last season in F1 Academy, so we'll need to see where she moves forward after this, and whether she can compete more closely with her sister this season. They finished 3 positions apart last year. Now, Kick Sauber was arguably already representing women with their Shigo-inspired livery this year, but racing in that same livery, we have Carrie Schreiner for F1 Academy. The German driver also raced in F1 Academy last season, scoring 56 points and finishing 11th overall. Carrie did race single-seaters previously in F4 in 2015, but ultimately switched over to GT racing before coming back to single-seaters here. And rounding out the F1 supported drivers for Haas, we have another American driver, Chloe Chambers. The 19-year-old made the move over to single-seaters in 2021 when she raced in the F4 US Championships. She also competed in the W Series before moving out of single-seaters into the Porsche Sprint Challenge North America. Now with Haas being an American team, it makes sense to see them choose an American driver and try to put a little bit of intention there. With F1 overall, we've already seen that there's an intent to bring a bigger American audience to the sport, and we've seen 3 different Grand Prix with an additional one being potentially added in Chicago, and Haas is the only American team on the grid, so moving into bringing an American driver in just makes sense. Ironically, we're seeing Williams make that same play. They've gone with Leah Block for their F1 Academy driver, they have Logan Sargent, the only American on the F1 grid, and they also decided to do their car launch event this season in North America. So we kind of have one American team and an additional team in Williams that's like, we could do America. So that rounds out the drivers that are being supported by the F1 teams. But like I mentioned, there are 15 drivers on the grid, so who's supporting those other 5 drivers? 4 of those drivers are being supported by corporate sponsors that have already been announced. Now, unlike in F1 where you'll see a number of sponsors on one car, which you will see with the F1 Academy drivers that are being sponsored by an F1 team, these last 5 cars actually have a single sponsor that's taking over the entire vehicle. I'll break them all down and the drivers, but I do want to point out that this is a pretty big investment for these companies. I haven't been able to find an exact figure on what these sponsors are paying for these cars, but what we do know is that the F1 teams are spending about $600K on these F1 Academy cars, so we have to assume that it's probably around that number or a little bit higher. That means that these sponsors are looking at F1 Academy and all female series and saying, I think that that is worth our money in marketing dollars. And I think that speaks extremely highly of what the economic value of women can be to racing. Okay, so who are these brands and who are their drivers? Red Bull was the first to announce, and they are supporting Emily de House. The French driver is in her 2nd season of F1 Academy, and last year she scored 87 points and finished 9th overall. Now, Emily is a Red Bull athlete, not a driver for Red Bull Racing, which I know might be a little bit confusing. She'll race in a Red Bull specific livery, and I think this move makes a lot of sense. Red Bull obviously already has a deep connection to F1. It's one of the most well-known names in the sport, and between Red Bull Racing's driver, VCARB's driver, and this Red Bull athlete, they're supporting the most number of drivers on the F1 Academy grid. They also have the added advantage of the fact that all 3 of those drivers are racing for the same team underneath F1 Academy. So when they're competing for the overall team championships, Red Bull is the only organization that will be able to say, our team won the entirety of F1 Academy. It's also been a great marketing opportunity for them because they're able to use all 3 drivers in their interviews, their marketing, their videos. It gives the organization more drivers on the grid, more opportunity to see podiums, and of course, wins. Now, the next sponsor that announced was the most exciting to me. Charlotte Tilbury is sponsoring not only a driver, but the entirety of F1 Academy this year. They're entering Lola Lovenfoss as their driver, who finished 10th last year in F1 Academy. And their car is actually kind of fun. If you look it up, it has just kind of the iconic Charlotte Tilbury lipstick lips all over the car. Now, the benefit of them is supporting the entirety of F1 Academy is that they're actually able to use, again, all of the drivers in the series for their marketing. They just released a great video where you get to meet each one of the drivers, and they are getting kind of a full face of makeup from Charlotte Tilbury products. This sponsorship in particular, I have already seen return for Charlotte Tilbury. I posted a video about this the day that they made the announcement, and women were commenting almost immediately saying, I didn't buy Charlotte Tilbury before, but because they're doing this, I am absolutely buying Charlotte Tilbury now. And ironically, it actually goes both ways because a lot of people were seeing this video because they follow makeup, not because they follow racing. I've seen people also talk about the fact that they didn't know that there was an all-female racing series that they can watch. But because Charlotte Tilbury made a large announcement about the fact that they're supporting all of these drivers, women who are only following the makeup content are now aware of F1 Academy and interested in watching it. So I think it's a beneficial partnership both ways. The other thing that's exciting about having a makeup brand as the sponsor here is that I think it takes a step forward into what we're expecting female athletes to be. Often I think we expect female athletes to sort of reject femininity. There's this idea that being feminine, wearing makeup, being girly, those things can't go hand in hand with being strong and a challenger and competitive. I'm hopeful that stuff like this means that we are in fact moving past that idea of what it means to be a woman, what it means to be a female athlete, and recognizing that if we have enough representation of women in a space, all of those women are then allowed to be individuals rather than having to sort of speak for the entire gender of what they're allowed to do, what they're powerful enough to do, and what our capabilities are. It's exciting to me to see a sponsor in this space like Charlotte Tilbury, not only because it shows that women bring a new category of sponsorship to racing, but because it's allowing Charlotte Tilbury to step forward and say, our brand means that being a woman can be anything. Being feminine can also go hand in hand with being taken seriously in a male-dominated space. And I know maybe it seems like I'm making a big deal out of foundation and blush, but I think even just in my lifetime, from being a kid and being an athlete as a woman, and now being an adult and watching these young women get a chance to be athletes in a big space, we have made leaps and bounds as to what's expected of us as women in these spaces. There's a really big excitement for me to see young women being told, if you want to do this, it doesn't mean you have to stop doing this. We get so caught up in this idea of fitting ourselves into a box that's required for us to be able to do the thing that we want to do. With a sponsorship like this, we're actually seeing a movement where we can say, maybe you wear makeup, maybe you don't. Either one of those things is acceptable, and neither version of them says anything about who you are as a race car driver. And I don't know, maybe I'm getting a little emotional over a little bit of makeup, but I think it's exciting. I think these are the kinds of building blocks that would have changed what I decided to do growing up. And sometimes it is that small. Sometimes it is that important. So that's the Charlotte Tilbury of it all. But yes, there are other brands sponsoring drivers, and we'll get into those. Next, we have Puma, who are sponsoring Aurelia Nobles. The Brazilian driver is also a member of the Ferrari Driver Academy, and she's competed in Italian F4, F4 UAE, and the Euro F4 Championship. Again, this partnership makes sense. Puma already has a heavy presence in F1. There's a ton of F1 licensed merch when it comes to all of the teams. And to be honest, that one single point is something I want to point out. I really hope that we see Puma do some official F1 Academy merchandise this year. When I got to see the girls race at COTA last year, I was so bummed because there was this little hat. It was like a purple hat that was for their podiums. It was like a baby purple, almost like a lavender. Lavender's the word I'm looking for. And I was so bummed because I was like, oh, I want that hat. And I went to the official merch stand and they just weren't selling them. They weren't selling anything that was F1 Academy related and not even a t-shirt. So I would really love to see Puma make that step this year. And again, if we do see them make that step, it's them acknowledging that they think that there is enough of a viability of the market to warrant producing that product. Now, the last confirmed main sponsor is Tommy Hilfiger. They're entering the Spanish driver Nuria Marti, and before this, she raced in Spanish F4 and the W Series, as well as last season of F1 Academy. Last season, she scored 141 points, finishing 4th overall. Now again, Tommy Hilfiger is no stranger to F1 partnerships. You've already seen George Russell and Lewis Hamilton walking around in the paddock, decked out in all Tommy. And you've seen their capsule collections that they've done with Mercedes, as well as Lewis and George in the ads, and even George's girlfriend recently. So again, it's not out of left field for them to be taking this step and sponsoring an F1 Academy car, but it is exciting to see them commit to an F1 Academy car in addition to their already other sponsorships. Not only is the car decked out in full Tommy Hilfiger regalia that is very hard to miss, but the whole team for this car will actually be wearing Tommy Hilfiger uniforms as well. It's a lot of great visibility for the brand, and I'm also excited, again, to see if we see any F1 Academy partnerships in the fashion space from this. And then the last driver on the grid is Jessica Edgar. She raced in F1 Academy last year, finishing 8th overall with 114 points, and this weekend at Jeddah, she'll be actually running an F1 Academy livery. It does seem like this is only going to be the case for one race, and that we'll see another sponsorship come out of this to sponsor the rest of her car, but that something maybe fell through or just wasn't finalized before the first race of the season. We'll see what pans out there, but it'll be interesting to see if we see another brand move into this space. Personally, I think it would be interesting to see maybe YouTube sponsoring this car. They're actually running all of the F1 Academy races on their channel, or something Gen Z focused like TikTok, or maybe something that feels a little bit more female focused like Charlotte Tilbury did. A fragrance, maybe Sol de Janeiro. I don't know, these are tiny pitches, but I think all of them would be interesting in the space. Now, those are our 15 drivers that will be permanent in the grid at every race. However, this season we're actually also adding in wildcard entries. These wildcard entries don't have to adhere to the age limitations or the requirements of F1 Academy, but instead these wildcard entries will be designed to feature a prominent female local racer, and they'll race only in that single race. For the Jeddah opener, we are going to see the Saudi Arabian racer Rima Jafali enter as the wildcard entry. Rima has already set some records for female racers. In 2018, she became the first ever female racing driver from Saudi Arabia. And the next year, she actually became the first Saudi Arabian woman to compete in an international race in her home country. Rima, like all other wildcard entries, will be eligible to earn points in this race, even though she won't be competing in the full series. These wildcard entries will bring a different level of skill, interest, and excitement to each of these races that they're a part of. And to be honest, I'm pretty excited to see her hit the grid this weekend. Okay, so we know the structure, we know how the sport got started, and we know how the race weekends work. We also know who's racing and who's sponsoring them. But the biggest question you might have is what happens after F1 Academy? Why does all of this matter? As I stated at the beginning of this episode, F1 Academy is not meant to be the place that your career starts and ends. Hopefully, after having the opportunity to learn and get track time and experience for 1 to 2 seasons, you move up to another series that's a step forward on the ladder. So for example, last year we saw the series winner Marta Garcia receive a fully funded FRECA seat for this year. The other thing that this series will give women is exposure. When you look at racers like Bianca Bustamante, who has crossed over 1 million followers on social media, they're getting attention that shows sponsors and teams that they actually bring an audience with them to their seat. They'll benefit from the press that they receive during this series, which also allows them to bring an added benefit to any team or sponsor that's interested in signing them for the next series. This series is also going to put women in cars in front of people. I know that seems like a really small point or maybe just obvious, right? But all 7 of these races this year are going to be raced at F1 weekends. That means people who are at the race waiting to watch F1 events are going to accidentally stumble into watching an F1 Academy race. People who may not be aware that F1 Academy exists will get a chance to see it while they're there. In addition, the F1 Academy races and events are being broadcast alongside all of the F1 events. So wherever you watch F1, you can also watch F1 Academy. That amount of broadcast power is really big for both the individuals that are in this series and the idea of women in racing in general. The more you see something, the more you believe that it's a thing that should be going on. Additionally, starting this year, F1 Academy drivers that finish in the top 5 slots will also earn FIA super license points. A total of 10 points will go to the winner, 7 for second place, 5 for third, 3 for fourth, and 1 for fifth. You need a total of 40 points to be eligible to race in F1. So I know you're thinking, Marissa, all this means is that tomorrow, next season maybe, we're going to see a woman take one of these F1 seats. Very much no. The gender gap in F1 is not something that's going to be fixed overnight. Susie Wolf herself has said that she thinks it'll take about 8 to 10 years before we see a woman take an F1 seat. What F1 Academy is an attempt to start fixing that gender gap. Women are consistently undersupported compared to men in this sport. Female drivers need the space to grow, to learn, to be educated, to get track time, but also to prove to the sport, to the sponsors, and to the audience that women bring an economic value to the sport. One of the biggest things that matters in motorsports is money. Sponsors are typically hesitant when it comes to sponsoring women, but if F1 Academy can prove that sponsors get a value from sponsoring women, then that's one really big hurdle that we're getting over. And the other thing that F1 Academy is hoping to prove, people will watch women race. We know demonstrably more and more women are watching F1 as a whole. Last year, 40% of all F1 viewership was female. Now, obviously, I'm not saying that that means women only want to watch women race. Obviously, if that were true, women wouldn't be watching F1. What it does mean is that women are interested in F1 as a whole. And women have a lot of spending power. A lot of women do want to watch women race. They want to cheer and hope that these women make it all the way to the top of the sport. And beyond that, men want to watch that too. At the event that I mentioned at the Las Vegas GP with Jamie Chadwick, one of the questions that stood out to me the most was a young father asking Jamie Chadwick, how do I get my daughter interested in F1? How can I get her excited about being a racing driver? And most importantly, how can I explain to her that it is something that she is capable of doing? And at COTA, when I got to see the F1 Academy drivers actually race, the other thing that I got to see were the young girls that were clamoring to meet these drivers, to ask for their autograph and take a picture. I got to see dads try to help them get to the front of the group. They got to see what it looks like to see someone who looks like you achieving your dreams. Ultimately, representation does matter to both the people watching the sport and the people who might be competing in the sport soon. So even if one of these 15 young women isn't the driver who makes to the F1 seat, all 15 of them make a difference to the generation that could be. I'm just so excited. I'm just so excited to watch these women hit the track this weekend. You can and you should watch the F1 Academy races this week. You can watch them wherever you watch F1. F1 Academy has posted a link of all of the different places that you can watch worldwide. I will link to that in the episode description so that you can find your streamer. I hope this video has helped you kind of get excited about about the series, understand a little bit about it, and maybe even pick your favorite driver. On Grid Chat, we will be recapping the F1 Academy events as well as F1, so you can tune into those episodes as well, and we'll have a lot of fun going through that. And as always, if you don't want to watch these races alone or the F1 races alone, you can join the actual Grid Chat. I host a group chat of motorsports fans where fan behavior is encouraged, and there's no such thing as a stupid question. We watch these races live together, chat about breaking news, and of course, send each other an unhealthy amount of memes. If you'd like to join the Grid Chat, you can do so at tandemproductions.com/gridchat. There will also be a link to that in the episode description. Once you fill out the form on the webpage there, you'll get an invite via email from me. If you want to connect, let me know what you thought about the episode, or even just ask me another question that you'd like me to cover on the show. You can find me on all social media platforms at Marissa Kamari. And one of the best ways to connect with me is if you're listening to this podcast on Herd FM. You can find me in the community section on Herd FM, where my username is just my first name, Marissa. And once we follow each other, after every episode that you listen to, I'll be able to comment and have a conversation with you directly. So again, my username on Herd FM is Marissa. So that's the F101 on F1 Academy. As always, I've been your host, Marissa Tandon, and thank you for joining the Grid Chat.